As you all probably know, there are many types of cars out there. Some are more expensive than others, and yet they have great demand. And because of that, the car makers building them create versions that are cheaper. And in order to achieve a low price, they must sacrifice some features. These are budget cars and they're more interesting than you think they are, which is why we'll be talking about them today. So having said that, this is AutoFil and I hope you enjoyed this video. Starting off, we have to talk about the Renault 4, and no, it is not a budget model. Sure, it may have been cheap, but it appears that Renault thought it wasn't cheap enough for it to be accessible to everybody. So when the company launched the R4, they also launched the Renault 3, which was a slightly cheaper version of the R4. Now you may be thinking, wait, what? Since when was there a Renault 3? Well, there was one, and I can tell you everything about it. As I said before, the R3 is basically a stripped down version of the R4, and so a handful of the R4's features are cut or made simpler. For example, the two models get their power from the same inline-4 engine, although the R3's engine is downsized from 747cc to 603cc. Also meaning that the R3 has less power. Outside of that, the budget model also had painted bumpers and a painted grille, a single sun visor, no windshield washer, and worst of all, no hubcaps. Oh no! Anyway, you've probably never heard of the R3 before, and there's a good reason for that. You see, Renault's idea of a more basic R4 didn't really take off, with customers opting for the more advanced R4 instead. So as any company would do to not waste money, Renault of course discontinued the R3 just 1 year and 3 months after its introduction. Talk about a short-lived model. If this video were about cars with the shortest production runs, the Renault 3 would definitely earn itself a spot on that list. Anyway, there isn't really much else to say about the R3, so I guess we shall move on. Okay, so next up we have a car that you most likely know about, and it's French, just like the Renault 3, although it comes from a different time period. That's right, it's the Peugeot 206. The 206 was a very successful model for Peugeot, selling millions thanks to the hatchback's practicality, affordability, and how economical it was. Given all that, Peugeot didn't really want to let the 206 go when the time came for the model's successor, the 207. Therefore, the French automaker decided to rebrand the 206 as a low-end alternative to the 207, renaming it to the 206 Plus. This new version of the 206 was only introduced in 2009, 3 years after the 207, although in other markets it was launched a year earlier. The 206 Plus is quite different from its original counterpart, as it was facelifted by Peugeot in order to make it look like a little brother to the 207. The rear end was also slightly redesigned, with altered tail lights replacing the old ones. The 206 Plus also had a different and more restricted range of engines compared to the 206, with 1.1 and 1.4 litre petrol engines, as well as a 1.4 litre HDI diesel engine. This made the 206 Plus cheaper and more reliable. With all that in mind, you'd think that the 206 Plus was a success, and it was a great success. In fact, it was offered here in Europe until 2013, as demand began growing for the new 208 along with Peugeot's new budget model, the 301. It did see a longer production in other regions though, as in Brazil, where it was sold as a saloon, called the 207 Brazil. The 206 Plus was offered until 2014. In Iran, where it was produced under a license, the 206 Plus, or should I say the 207i, was sold all the way until last year. So as I said before, the Peugeot 206 Plus was an excellent success, and it just goes to show how popular Peugeot is. Okay, that being said, let's continue with the video. you probably recognize the name Volkswagen Santana. If you don't, let me explain. The Santana was a mid-sized saloon sold by Volkswagen from 1981 to 1984 as a more upmarket Passat with higher quality materials and equipment. Even so, it shared the B2 Passat's platform, and because of that, it wasn't too different mechanically from its cheaper cousin. With that in mind, you're probably wondering, why is the VW Santana on this list if it isn't a budget car? Well, in 1983, the Santana was introduced to China as an inexpensive family car. It was even given an estate version, which didn't exist here in Europe. The Santana was still based on the B2 Passat, and believe it or not, it stayed the same for a whopping 20 years. Now, of course, the Chinese Santana wasn't exactly the same throughout its life. In 1995, it was redesigned without replacing many of the original components and renamed to the Santana 2000. After that, 4 years later, the Santana was facelifted to make it look like the new Volkswagen sold at the time, and another facelift was introduced in 2008, and during all this time, the original Chinese Santana from 1983 was still being sold alongside the facelifted ones, and all of these were still based on the B2 Passat. However, all good things come to an end eventually, and so the original Chinese Santana based on the B2 Passat was discontinued in favour of a newer and sleeker compact saloon, while keeping the Santana name. This kind of reminds me of the Chinese Jetta, which was based on the B4 Passat, and kept getting sold in China, even after the B4 Passat's discontinuation there, as a budget car until an entirely new version was introduced later on. So to answer the question we asked earlier on, why is the Santana on this list? Simply put, the Santana was kept in production in China, despite being an outdated model, as a budget alternative to VW's newer Chinese models, and even then, the new Santana, sold from 2013 to 2022, was still sort of a budget car judging by its size and appearance. Each of these versions of the Santana were used by taxi and police fleets, showing just how popular and affordable this car was. I think that should be enough about the Volkswagen Santana, so let's continue with the video. Next up is an American automobile made by the notorious General Motors. What I'm talking about is the Chevrolet Cavalier, the third generation to be specific. This 90s coupe may look sporty and handsome, but it really is just a cheaper, more budget-friendly variation of another GM car, the Pontiac Sunfire. The Sunfire was a sports coupe and saloon offered as a successor to the Pontiac Sunbird, while the Chevy Cavalier was the Sunfire's more affordable, although less powerful twin brother. The Cavalier is notable for also being sold as a Toyota exclusively in Japan, although this rebadge only lasted 5 years in contrast to the original's 10 years. Now, even with the Cavalier being considered a budget car by most people, it only really had different styling, and that's it, as the platform and the engines were both shared by the Cavalier and its more expensive Pontiac sibling. The styling was really the only main difference, as well as the brand, and because this was a Chevrolet, the Cavalier obviously had a lower price than the Pontiac Sunfire, as Pontiac was considered to be a more premium brand. And so the Cavalier basically serves as a more affordable Sunfire, even though there are little to no mechanical differences between the two. I did say mechanical though, as there are some differences between the two that just makes the Cavalier a more affordable car. For example, it was quite an unsafe vehicle like most budget cars, with it getting a poor overall score in crash tests hosted by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. Cavalier also had cheap interior materials and underwhelming performance, despite all of its engines measuring at least 2 litres. With that in mind, the Chevy Cavalier to some was just a blatant cash grab by GM, made just to fill out a market segment. When it comes to my opinion, the Cavalier is a generally boring car. Although I've always been fond of American cars from the 90s, it always fascinated me how such unremarkable cars can be somewhat likeable, but it's just my opinion. That's all I have to say about the Cavalier, so we're moving on. Our last car for today is another vehicle straight from the showrooms of General Motors. Oh boy. Anyway, back in 1989, GM introduced a new brand to its lineup called Geo. This marque was supposed to sell small budget-friendly cars, most of which were actually cars made by another company, but rebadged as a Geo. One of these cars was the Metro, a rebadged second generation Suzuki Cultus, better known here in Europe as the Swift. And yeah, I guess you can already tell this Metro was only really made to fill out a market segment, like the Chevy Cavalier. It was basically the same thing as the Suzuki Swift, which was literally sold in the US alongside the Geo Metro, making it an obvious cash grab. With that said, the Metro did manage to attract customers, and so GM would end up launching a second generation of the cute hatchback in 1995. In the end, the Geo Metro ended up outlasting the Geo brand itself, and would be rebranded as a Chevrolet after that brand's demise, and was also sold as a Pontiac in Canada. A good reason for the Metro's success has to be its versatility though. This may seem like just a humble hatchback, but it was also offered as a saloon and convertible. There's also the Metro's reliability. It is technically a Japanese car, so it was very reliable, as per usual when it comes to Japan's cars. The Metro's fuel economy was also stunning, at a stellar 42 miles per gallon. All of this helped it survive until 2001, when it was succeeded by the Chevrolet Aveo. And that's essentially it when it comes to the Geo Metro, a humble compact car that, thanks to its fuel economy, versatility and reliability, became a great success and certainly made General Motors a lot of money. I think that should be enough for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to like and subscribe. With all that said, this is AutoFil, see you later.